Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning. Thank you for joining ELA today in our Urban Pollinator Corridors webinar with Heather. Before I introduce Heather, I want to let everyone know that ELA does have our annual conference coming up this February. So be sure to check your inboxes for more information on that. We'll be sending out our monthly bulletin next week. So without further ado, let me introduce Heather. Heather McCargo is a founder of Wild Seed Project and is an educator with 35 years of expertise in plant propagation, landscape design, and conservation. She was the head plant propagator at the Native Plant Trust Garden in the Woods during the 1990s, worked in landscape architecture planning firms specializing in ecological design, and has been a contributor to the research projects with USAID, the National Gardening Association, and MOFGA. She lectures nationally and is widely published in journals and magazines. Heather has a BA in plant ecology from Hampshire College and an MA from the Conway School of Landscape Design. Wild Seed Project, a Maine-based nonprofit that works to increase the use of native plants in all landscape settings in order to conserve biodiversity, encourage plant adaptation in the face of climate change, safeguard wildlife habitat, and create pollination and migration corridors for insects and birds. Wild Seed Project sells seeds of locally grown native plants and educates the public on seed sowing so that a wide range of citizens can participate in increasing native plant populations. Thank you so much, Heather, for sharing your time today with the ELA community. And without further ado, we look forward to your webinar.
Well, I'm really happy to be here to talk about urban pollinator corridors because it's critical that we bring healthy native habitat into our city and suburbs. And I'm going to show you the different opportunities and challenges that we've had in Portland, Maine, which is the home city of Wild Seed Project. This is an aerial view of the greater Portland, Maine area. And remember, just a little over 10,000 years ago, the glacier had just retreated from this land, leaving nothing but rock and ice. As the vegetation returned, the first peoples appeared, and they adapted and thrived to this rapidly changing landscape. And the current flora that we have here really only migrated in the last 1,000 years. The first people's lifestyle was completely disrupted when the Europeans, explorers, and colonists appeared and began exploiting the land. Today, we are beginning to acknowledge that this land is Wabanaki territory. Now, from a distance, the land still appears green. But zoom in closer and the urbanization and loss of nature becomes clearer. And in fact, much of Portland, of the city, is really devoid of plants completely. Now, this is the charming historic part of Portland, but yet there's hardly a tree in sight. Portland is even called the forest city, but that really was only true before the streets were paved and Dutch elm disease wiped out the monoculture planting of elm trees. And so now this is what we're left with. And we all know the problems of lack of vegetation in a city. It raises surface temperatures, it causes more flooding and air pollution, and of course the damage to our human psyche. And then few wild creatures can exist in this kind of environment. The city of Portland still has some amazing patches of mature woodland right within the city limits. They're on the edges of some of the parkland and along the rivers and in some of the cemeteries. There's lots of mature canopy trees with a diversity of slow-growing woodland understory plants, such as the false hellebore and ferns that you can see here. Also, trilliums and other woodland lily species, wood anemone, all the sort of slow-growing woodland plants. And many of these plants can't even exist in young forest, and they're really relics from a pre-colonial time. Now, for remnant native habitat to survive into the future, they cannot be isolated. plants and animals become inbred, cut off by development with no way to migrate. Most pollinators can only travel a couple hundred meters. And then birds, it's critical that birds have an abundance of native plants where the diversity of insects that only can survive on native plants can live. So to function, these isolated patches of native habitat need to be connected. And in our urban areas of Portland, like most cities, green spaces have lost biodiversity and will continue to lose it if they remain isolated. So in the winter of 2015, when Wild Seed Project was in its first year as a nonprofit, we engaged some graduate students from the Conway School of Landscape Design, of which I am an alumni, full disclosure here, to study Portland and create for us the Portland Pollinator Vision Plan. Now, the idea of pollinator corridors or pathways, networks, these were popping up all across Europe, particularly widespread there, and in different parts of the United States too. And Wild Seed Project wanted to have a way to highlight the opportunities in Portland. We chose the word pollinator because it's a really helpful word for a general audience. In Portland already, there were a lot of community groups and nonprofits, from schools and community gardens to groups such as the Portland Pollinator Partnership, the local parks, Portland Trails, Audubon Society. All these groups were actively wanting to support urban pollinators. What we felt was needed was a vision for the whole city to help the public understand that the word pollinator needs to mean native habitat. And the goal was to help people envision a network of corridors of native vegetation in this city that would enable the bees, butterflies, birds, and plants to all live, reproduce, and migrate across the landscape. As the students began their work, they held a lot of community meetings, talked with city park officials, any group that would listen, they would meet with, environmental nonprofits, homeowners, and in general, the public are very open to talking to students. So it was great. They had a lot of success. They held public meetings to talk about their ideas. And one of the first things they did was start doing some intensive site analysis. And this map shows the 1,900 acres of permeable surface in the city. So permeable means it's not paved. So it's not roof or paving, but it can be dirt, gravel, natural areas, lawn, as long as it's not paved. And I want you to remember that 1,900 acres, that's the potential, because where there's permeable surface, we have native species that can grow, even in really tough urban conditions, from sunny, hot, and dry with no soil to full shade. We have native species that can thrive in this environment. And so some more site analysis they did was talking to all the different potential players, the parks, the highway department, including the DOT, the roadway, schools, public buildings, suburban habitat, businesses. And so you can actually go to the Wild Seed Project website and read online the whole Portland Pollinator Vision Plan to get more details on what this is all about. So now I'm going to move into some examples, both the successes and the many challenges we've had in getting this 1,900 acres of permeable surface planted. So I'm going to start with public parks and other public lands. And this is one of the big parks in Portland, the Western Prom, and that because of our public meetings, the couple groups, the Portland Pollinator Partnership, reached out to us, and we met with the city and said, could we plant one of these rectangle plots that are usually planted with tulips and other annuals, would you let us, plant it with make it a native pollinator garden? So this is what they have many of these plots all over the city. This is what they look like for much of the year till they're planted temporarily with different annuals. And so we designed and then planted a, native perennial garden, and all native plants are pollinator plants. They all provide habitat, both in their foliage and stems and in the nectar for different pollinators. We have a little sign there. We've had different workshops there. So we've had a lot of fun. It's a lot of, a perennial garden takes regular, yearly management to weed and particularly re-edge. So it's not a no maintenance planting, but it's certainly much less work and no added resources. And right away, the birds and butterflies and bees started coming. There's another park in South Portland. This is Fort Williams Park, the children garden there. This is not a Wild Seed Project partner park, but we have partnered with this organization a lot, and they planted a 3-acre children's garden almost exclusively in native plants that's open to the public. And it's now, I think, in its 5th year. So it's quite a great place to go see a variety of native plants and for children to play. Right in the very urban main street of Portland, Congress Street, about 5 years ago, they hired Patrick Kalina. He was one of the designers of the High Line to do a design and planting. We had an article about this redesign of Congress Square Park, and he used all native plantings. Nothing has happened in that time, but there is now part of the area is ripped up, and I believe they are starting to actually realize this park. One of Wild Seed Project's key seed volunteers also is a retired science teacher from schools, and she has done a lot of planting projects with different school groups. And this is the South Portland High School, where she works with an after school group, and this was a barren lot. And she, with the students, grew from seed all the plants, and then this is what it looks like now. Here's the children's garden. Here's the Congress Square Park redesign. Here's the South Portland High School. And this is what it looks like now after Jamie and working with the students to both grow the plants from seed and then to plant it. Then after our little perennial garden project in the Western Prom, we wanted to do more permanent plantings. And so this is the Harborview Park native habitat planting. And what we did was plant some small native flowering trees, shad and redbud, and then plant a native ground cover of some of the wood asters and Canada anemone and black-eyed coneflower. And so we got approval to plant this in the spring, or in the winter actually. And so we had a plan of, we put down cardboard and mulch and then planted the young trees in May with a group of volunteers. And then at the same time, we had sowed the seeds for the ground covers, and then those got planted out right through the mulch in late September. So we were able to get it done the first year, but we didn't do it all. And that worked really well. The trees were all bare root trees. Okay, a lot of the habitat in the public land in Portland is more degraded native habitat, where there's bits of remnant piece of woods, like this one here, where there's some native red oak and maple and a little bit of birch, and then a lot of the common invasives such as Norway maple, Asian honeysuckle, sometimes Japanese knotwood, or other invasive species. These areas could support many native plants. and then all the life that goes along with that, with some restoration. Okay, this is Deering Oaks Park. This was actually designed by Olmsted, and it's got incredible canopy of trees, mostly native oak trees, but yet most of it is just mowed underneath. The city has started to take one section where they're not mowing it during the growing season, and starting with some of the school groups to add some more native plants, but still getting a lot of invasives coming in. So it takes monitoring in these natural areas. Very common in old graveyards are often a great remnant habitat for native species, because they were, in New England at least, they were areas that were set aside early in the colonial days, and so they were never plowed. They might have been grazed a little. They often have dry, sandy soil, so it doesn't favor the turf grasses so much. And so you can have both, you know, in this picture you're seeing some hawkweed, but there's also pussy toes and native violets and wild strawberry and bluets still persisting in the thin grassy areas. And the problem is these areas are mowed too much to really get a diversity of native meadow species. And in fact, this picture was taken right when all those other plants were blooming. So mid-season mowing in a meadow favors the exotic Eurasian grasses and the invasive species, and really sets back all the native plants. And you really need to only do the mowing in the dormant season. Mid-season mowing, and that's any time during the growing season, really sets back the natives. So aside from mowing some paths and edges, it would be better not to. Here's the graveyard in late summer, when again it's looking very natural with the tall grasses, but then it tends to get mowed before. There's even a little bit of little blue stem in here, gets mowed before that native grass can go to seed. There's no asters because it's all mowed before that would happen. There's other areas in the city that they're playing with, the city's playing with letting them be more meadow-like. This is in the Eastern Prom, where there are some native asters and milkweed in here. There's a lot of exotics, some of which are a problem, others which aren't. The trick with these areas is, because there's so many invasive species in the surrounding areas, really takes knowledgeable monitoring to keep the invasives from coming into the meadows. And then of course, roadsides were highlighted in the, are a great pollinator corridor area, and they were a big part that was highlighted in the Portland Pollinator Vision Plan. But mostly we mow them like turf. Occasionally, there's a roadside in Portland where seaside goldenrod has come in on its own and is thriving because it tolerates a, salt spray and complete dry area, dry, well-drained soil, and even a little bit of pollution. In 2016, Wild Seed Project received a grant from the Maine DOT to create a manual to restore roadside vegetation. And this is all available for free to use on our website. And just to give you a sample of what's in there, we cover about 75 species of herbaceous and shrubby plants that could also be on the roadside. We have their growing conditions, where they grow in the wild, what wildlife they support, and the best time to mow. And then of course the propagation information, when they bloom, when the seed ripens, and how you can collect and sow the seeds. Street trees, urban trees, trees are our biggest biodiversity magnet, particularly oak trees, which are famous for supporting the most biodiversity of any of our native trees. And Portland loses more street trees every year than we gain. It's been a steady decline since the Dutch elm disease. New York City, about 5 years ago, completed a 1,000,000 tree campaign. You know, if they can do it, we can do it too. Lots of cities are taking on planting more street trees. It's usually a partnership with both public and private people working together. But yeah, this is what a lot of the street tree wells look like in Portland. No tree, you know, and abandoned. You know, occasionally they do come and replant them, but the holes are pretty small. Portland, the old paving in Portland was brick laid over sand, which is much better for supporting street trees. But lately they've been pulling the brick up and paving underneath it and then laying the brick on top, so shrinking the amount of resources available to the street trees. Occasionally we do get native trees like this red oak that's got enough space that they can grow and become big. Wild Seed Project has a lot of resources on native trees, both free ones on our website with blogs and then in our different publications, including the one totally dedicated to native trees. Then under the trees, you know, for some reason in the Northeast, people seem to think mulch is landscaping. And these shady spots, we do have a lot of native plants beside just hostas, which are not native, that can thrive in these shade, full shade, part shade, and dry areas under the street trees. This is my little planting area under the street tree that's planted with Canada anemone, blue stem goldenrod, zigzag goldenrod, large leaf wood aster, and white wood aster. Here's another view of it. And after I did that, it moved me to write an article called Health Strip Planting. They both published it through the ELA publication, and it's on our Wild Seed Project website, where I talked about all the potential and the different combinations of native plants for different growing conditions. So you can go get different plant lists for sunny, dry, or shady, or low and wet. And now I'm going to show you a bunch of examples, just even in my neighborhood in Portland, where people have added native plants to their little health strip. Wild Seed Project created these signs that people can put up. This has actually matured a lot since I took this picture, was planted by a woman in her 70s. It's all butterfly milkweed, goldenrod, black-eyed coneflower, northeast penstemon. Black-eyed coneflower is a very tough plant for a health strip. This one was planted from seed. Here's a great one in the parking lot of a co-op with in this picture, you're seeing the wild rose. Some other great bee balm and baptisia and aruncus, penstemon and coneflower. This is a native delphinium and bee balm and more coneflower. This is a particularly beautiful one where they planted a huge area between their house and the street. Another small health strip with just Canada anemone and wood aster and a swamp white oak, which is a very tough, makes a tough urban street tree. Even sometimes natives will grow spontaneously. This is Virginia creeper, that just, a bird planted this, and it's mostly on paving and on a wall. And then Portland has started to put in some rain garden swales. This one's planted with switchgrass and Joe Pye weed and milkweed, and they're great. We just need a lot more of them. And then we have quite a few of our Wild Seed Project members have planted the street side of their house, all with native plant to create a lot of habitat. This is my yard in Portland. I'm in the Portland West End. This street side gets no sun. Even a native vine can create a lot of habitat. If you don't have a lot of space to plant on the ground, don't be afraid to go up. And on the Wild Seed Project website, we have a blog on a dozen native vines. And then, you know, I'm always excited to get people who don't own their own land. They're either renters, you know, you can grow a lot of native plants in pots. And this is Anna Fielkoff, the Wild Seed Project seed program, not seed, the ecological habitat program manager. The front of her apartment, she has all these different pots with different native plants in them. Some more native planters and window boxes, so everybody can do something. And then, of course, if you turn to your backyard where there's more space, the potential to support a lot of native habitat is much greater. And this is one of the Wild Seed Project members who has a spectacular native garden, very designed with beautiful stone walls and edging and lots of different species of native plants blooming throughout the year. This is my shady backyard. This also doesn't get any sun. This is a real suburban meadow where it was all lawn, and Greg and Jamian both started by smothering different patches of grass, then growing from seed to plant. So this is, in this picture, you're looking at black-eyed coneflower, Rudbeckia hirta, not Rudbeckia fulgida, and Verbena stricta, the hoary bee balm, but there's lots of other species in here blooming throughout the season. This is my released freed lawn that I turned into a meadow just by releasing the grass. And we have a blog on the Wild Seed Project website called How to Make a Native Meadow, where you can read about how to do this. It's particularly beautiful in the fall with a lot of different species of asters and coneflowers. I'm now actually converting this area to a forest. And then one of our Wild Seed Project members back to some more native habitat. So he has a much more rewilded area where he didn't plant. He just edits out the exotics and lets the natives come back. In 2020, after Wild Seed Project had just released their sort of 10-year strategic plan on what we were hoping to see happen over the next decade at the organization. And it was right after Doug Tallamy's most recent research about how if you really don't have 2/3 of the vegetation on the landscape isn't native habitat, native species, then you don't support the insects, which supports the bird to, make it function as an ecosystem. So really making us realize we need to find a way to get people to up their game. So we wrote a blog called Rewilding with lots of beautiful pictures on how you can rewild your landscape. And then we encourage people to take our pledge to rewild, which then basically signed you up for a free online course that walks you through all the 10 steps to rewilding and all the different Wild Seed Project content on how to do this. And one of our board members, who's a landscape architect, Julia Frederick, I gave her a bunch of pictures and she created a lot of images for us with before and after. So here's a picture of downtown Portland in a very paved area. And then she made this great image of what it could look like if it was greener. Here's another example of a typical shopping center, which this would even be considered well landscaped in Maine. A lot of areas get no landscaping, but we wanted to show what it could look like if it was planted with native species instead of just daylilies. And here's another great image. So here I'm going to focus on the challenges, which are we really need to scale up. So let's think back to that original image that the Conway students made of the 1,900 acres of permeable paving in Portland. And when I look out on my street and see how little change has happened in the 5 years since that, most of Portland still looks like this lower left picture. And the beautiful pieces of forest, which is in the upper right hand corner of this picture, are more and more isolated and losing more biodiversity every year goes by. We have to find a way to scale up big time. We've got examples of what needs to be done, and the work of Wild Seed Project has really been to have resources to help people figure out how to do this. In fact, it's obviously the work of ELA too. Like, there's a lot of great information out there how to do it. And, it's actually a lot of fun. It's a community, when we do these planting projects, we get a great team of volunteers who all sign up to come help do the work. They all have a great time. It builds community and it's nourishing to the soul. We show people at Wild Seed Project how to grow the plants, because that's one of the obstacles, is getting the genetically diverse seed grown native plants at nurseries. And so this is something that all of us can be doing. There's lots of species that are easy to grow from seed. And again, you can, that's a topic for another talk, but you can see the little pots of seedling on the picture here on the lower right. And this is the time of year when you sow the native seeds. December, January, early February, you sow the seeds in pot, put them outside, and they germinate in the spring, and then you end up planting them outside in the fall. And in fact, that picture with the volunteers in the upper left, that is after they were planting the native ground covers in that Harbor View Park planting that we did the trees in the spring and put down cardboard and mulch, let the mulch smother the lawn, and while we grew these seedlings on, and then they planted them out in late September, which is a great time to plant these seedlings, because juvenile plants settle in really nicely. If you plant them in the fall, you can, the long, hopefully cool fall weather is great for root growth, and they will come back strongly the next spring. So this is doable if we put our mind to it. And so that's one of the things I'm hoping from some of you in the questions and answers is I'd love to hear either what successes you've had with getting this to happen, and we need it to happen in a big way. So how do we make that happen? Just imagine, these little examples I've shown you are little successes. If we could scale that up in a big way, just imagine not only what the city of Portland would look like, with more of the native vegetation that makes Maine such a beautiful state, or in your city with your local native species planted that, these habitat plantings would support the migration of the pollinating insects and birds and plants. And also these green corridors would really connect urban people with nature on a daily basis, which is what we all need to do to both be happy, healthy people. So with that, I'm happy to turn to questions and answers. So
Awesome. A few questions have come in through the chat. Is it all right if I just
yes.
start rattling at you? All right. The first one is from Michelle. Which non-native plants aren't a problem in meadows and which should be pulled?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, wherever you live, you know, you can get a list from your state, the worst invasives, but typically in a meadow, well, knotweed, the exotic lupin. In Portland, we have a lot of problem with black swallowwort. So bittersweet vine that tends to seed into meadows. Some of the other invasive shrubs like buckthorn and the Asiatic and European honeysuckles. Queen Anne's lace isn't a problem. Hawkweed, not usually a big problem. You sort of have to look, it depends what state you're in. So you need to look at what's listed as an invasive species by your state to know for sure. Daisies, I don't find those dominate. But the invasive species, what makes them make that invasive list is they tend to grow as a solid monoculture and crowd everything else out. Most meadows, in open sunny areas where it's moderately, medium soil, the grasses tend to be none of the native species. They're mostly the Eurasian agricultural grasses. And it's why when you mow during the growing season, you stimulate those grasses to grow back really densely and they make a solid mat. So that's why the mid-season mowing, it's better when you do have invasives during the growing season to go back and clip them in at the base. If it's a wet area, purple loosestrife is a problem. If you go read the Wild Seed Project blog on making a native meadow, that will walk you through some of this too, but it's not generic. It really depends where you are. But in Portland, black swallowwort, honeysuckle, bittersweet. Those are some of the worst.
Awesome, thank you. Someone was also asking if you could share some more information about the Portland Pollinator Plan, who composed it, for whom, and how long ago specifically?
So you can go read, that's on the Wild Seed Project website under our publications, and the Conway School of Landscape Design, which is located in Northampton, Massachusetts. They probably have it on their website too. It's a one-year master's program, and they've done other pollinator plans since this one. This was the first one they did, and you can read the whole report on both our website and their website. It was done in the winter of 2015. And so you can hire the school, that all the projects they do are real world projects. And so we hired them to do this in the first year of Wild Seed Project.
Awesome. And I posted that link to the publication in the chat below, if anyone else is curious.
You should also post the link to the DOT manual, because that's a very valuable resource for people.
Yep, you got it.
Great free information. And you can also download it and put it on your computer. There's lots of great information on 75 different species.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Deborah has asked, hi, Heather. I had a question about planting along roads and highways. I've heard mixed things. On the one hand, that it's important to use any existing land to put native plants, and on the other hand, that can be putting creatures at risk, birds, butterflies, small insects, small mammals, etc., by drawing them close to those dangerous areas. I see so many animals killed on the road. What are your thoughts?
So this research has already been done, but for instance, animals such as deer and turkey, they are much more likely to eat where it's been mowed, because the grass grows back really green and lush versus in the middle of the summer, the rest of the vegetation is, taller and drier and tough. If there's more insects, are more of them going to get hit by the windshield? Of course. But, and for those of you who are over, 50, you will remember when our windshields used to be covered with squished insects, but that was a sign that there were more insects out in the world too. So, you can mow maybe a 6-foot border right on, the edge of the road. But this is nothing radical that we have proposed here. Other parts of the country and world have been restoring native plants on the roadside. And yes, if there's more life, some of them are gonna get hit by a car, but the insects more likely, they're not tempted to fly out into the pavement. They're after the nectar and pollen. So they're gonna go up and down it, and then they need to overwinter in the remaining vegetation.
Thank you. Someone else has asked, what plant did you mean by coneflower? Someone suggested echinacea. I just wanted to make sure.
So there's a dozen Echinacea species native to North America. In the picture I was showing you, that was an Echinacea angustifolia.
Awesome.
But also Echinacea purpurea. Couple of them reach into the northeast and southeast. Most of them are prairie plants. All of them are very tough and drought tolerant. It's important with Echinacea to get the straight species, not all the new cultivars and hybrids, which are all cloned and mass produced in greenhouses and not tough pollinator plants at all.
Awesome. And someone else has asked, do individuals have to get city permission to plant in hill strips?
So it varies from city to city. So I can guarantee a bunch of these pictures that I've showed you that little people did, they just did it. So it varies from city to city. Some cities have passed ordinances that ask you to plant them. And then others, in general, it's a good idea to have the plants be lower, a foot or two at the most. And I outlined this in the health strip blog that I wrote. And it's also printed as an article through ELA, planting a health strip. So I picked all lower species. So, if you wouldn't go out, you can't go plant on the public highway, that's for sure. And that would be sort of a dangerous place to work, I would presume. But, most people's sidewalks, they're happy to have planted. And I know lots of people have done this, not only in Portland, but in lots of other cities across the country. In Paris, actually, they have people adopt different areas and plant them. So this is a huge movement. And if your city's not open to it, it's time to convince them that it is, because it's really, it's critical that we scale this up. The changing climate and the loss of biodiversity, we can do something about this by revegetating with native species whenever possible.
Who does the monitoring of the sites on parklands? Staff, volunteers, or others?
Mostly volunteers. I mean, sometimes staff do. We have a small staff, so it's not something they're doing regularly. So we have the volunteers who help with it. That's one of the beauties of it. They sort of often will take ownership of it and participate in it. Sometimes we'll have a volunteer work day to go in there and re-edge it, like anywhere in parks, anywhere there's lawn going up to the edge of a planting bed, the turf grass just starts to creep in. So you have to cut it back 6 inches or even a foot every year. And so that's a great volunteer job. So I think the more ways we can engage people to take ownership of our parkland, the better, because all of our, parks are understaffed.
Definitely.
Same thing with street trees. You see a street tree planted, don't hesitate to go give it water on a dry summer, because most likely there's nobody else doing that. That was one thing that the New York City's tree planting, Million Tree Campaign did very successfully. They have little tags with each tree, giving the name of the tree and a QR code, so you can go look it up online and you can find out what kind of tree it is, when it was planted, and you can report that you just gave it 5 gallons of water as a way for people to participate and help the city keep up with these newly planted areas.
Awesome. And then there's one question that a bunch of people want to know the answer to. Is it possible to get rid of a super invasive in a meadow like common mugwort or wild artemisia? Pulling it out isn't realistic.
Yes. Well, so a lot of ones you can clip them right at the base during the growing season, and instead of pulling it out, and it will take a few, depending on how bad the weed is, will depend how long it will take. But humans are perfectly capable of wiping out any species that we want, even these pain in the neck invasive ones. They just take more persistence. And so this is where get a group of people together and meet up and do it a couple times during the growing season, and certainly keep it from going to seed. A great time to go do that clipping is right the second it starts to bloom. Clip it out so that it's doesn't get a chance to reproduce, and then the existing vegetation will fill in. That's been shown to be more effective, especially during the growing season, than pulling it out, because then you expose the soil, the bare dirt, of which there's millions of weed seeds in there.
You posed the question, how do we scale up? I've been thinking about that a lot myself. Things that have occurred to me primarily relate to legislation. The movement has been operating on volunteers ever since Rachel Carson wrote 50 years ago. And there's lots of wonderful volunteers who have done great things. But if we're going to really rally large segments of the population, there needs to be regulatory incentives in place. And I wondered if Wild Seed had spent any time thinking about developing legislation to propose.
We have not gone that route yet, mostly because we've been a small, young organization. But, if I look at the places where more movement is happening, like in some European cities like Barcelona and Copenhagen and Paris, or in the American cities where there's more happening, they are required to. I worked as a landscape architect in the mid 80s in San Francisco, and any shopping center, health strip had to be planted. It didn't have to be planted native, but it had to be planted. And that wasn't because, the developer wanted to do that. It was because it was required. So I do think we need to get political. And it is something we're talking about as an organization, but we haven't gone there in the past. What we've tried to do, our expertise is how to do this, the actual nuts and bolts of how do you get native plants into the landscape. And so we have created, both on our website, through our programs, and in our publications, a huge resource, how to make this happen. But we haven't gotten there with the policy yet. But I do think that needs to happen more. I think we as citizens need to be more vocal to our public officials that this is what we want, and we need to see it happen.
I was just, I'm just getting started. We have some common area at our condo association, and I got the idea I should try to plant native species. So I go to my normal landscaping places and I find, very, very few things. And I think one of the realities is that I just retired, so I'm going to have some time to do more of this. But for people who are busy, if they can go somewhere and pick up native plants, not start from seed, we're going to get a lot further faster.
Yeah, and so for it, of course, not everybody is going to grow them themselves. It's a very economical thing to grow the plants yourself. So a lot of groups don't have the resources to go buy plants. And so growing them from seed is a lot cheaper. But Wild Seed Project's website has a nursery. We have a very curated listing of nurseries throughout the Northeast that sell, if not exclusively, at least then a lot of native plants. We have a fall plant sale. A lot of other organizations have native plant sales now. And then ELA has really dedicated itself to educating the professional landscaping world. And Massachusetts, where ELA started, is a living example of a lot of ecological landscapers, I think.
Yeah, I'll check that out. I didn't realize there was a list on the website. Do we have anybody in Portland that has a lot of native plants?
Go to the website and look at it.
All right, I'll check it out. Thank you.
On that conversation, because I've been thinking these same things, and as my daughter wanted something from a store and I went and grabbed it for her, I noticed the shopping plaza there are some places where they've done some native plantings, and I look at them and go, oh, that's so great. Like, look at them doing that. And as I was walking out, you see what I am imagining are the original plantings, which are all Nandina and not native, right? Miscanthus and all of that. And so I'm a designer, and I'm looking at this and going, proud of what they've done, which looks to me like they're newer steps. And then going, and kind of what you were saying is, in the building permit process, if it was just required that all of their plantings had to be native, how much more better. But then for the other part as well, that as a designer, and I'm working with people every day, I always have to educate them on what natives look like. And when I tell them I only do 70% native, they're all on board with biodiversity until I explain to them all their favorites, their lilacs and their azaleas and everything that they like aren't native, right? So you have to re-educate them at what native looks like. And I think a lot of them think it's messy and it's unkept and it's unruly and it's not what looks beautiful, and kind of challenging what looks beautiful. So what I think would be beautiful is if it's part of the building permit process, it becomes more part of our commercial landscape that's kind of standard, and we become used to seeing it. When we become used to seeing it, and when then we're appreciating it and we're seeing all the color and the value and the beauty, I think it's easier that it would become the norm. That's been my observations as I've been thinking about this stuff.
Yeah. And again, that is what we've worked really hard to educate people on. So we have native species of azalea and native species of rhododendron. We have two native hydrangea species. We have lots of great native plants. It's just the nurseries don't even know them. Mm-hmm. And if you're a professional designer doing more high-end clients, I really recommend, there's a couple books, Doug Tallamy's book that he did with Rick Dark has big, beautiful pictures of, expensive landscapes all planted with natives. Same with Larry Wiener's book and Claudia West's book. There are, yeah, good. And show them too, because these plants are beautiful. Just people don't know it. It is a bit of a different look. And if you can say, okay, what are your favorite exotic? Like, so far anyways, lilac is not invasive. Miscanthus is, so that should be off the table, not even an option. But you can, they can keep a few exotics as long as they're not native. Not invasive. The other problem with a lot of the plants at nurseries, remember, the nursery industry now mostly clones their plants, which means it's done and they're grown in a greenhouse. They're treated with a lot of chemicals, including neonicotinoids, the insecticide that goes into the tissue of the plant and stays in that plant for 3 years. that's the norm in how these plants are produced. And so we do need to, you know, to support the nurseries that are growing, propagating the natives organically. And, you know, a shift can happen, you know, 30 years ago, nobody saw, you know, the general public didn't understand why organic agriculture and food was important. And then, you know, what happened? The alar was a chemical that was used on apple trees, and suddenly it became aware that it was a carcinogen, and everybody was feeding their children applesauce and apple juice. And Meryl Streep got behind a campaign to ban this pesticide from food production. And that's when the general public became aware of the value of organic. And look what's happened in the organic food movement. And the same can happen in the nursery movement. We just have to keep asking for it and saying, I want to buy these plants, not those plants. And this is, since it's winter, this is the time of year to do your homework. And like I said, go through our, if you're in the Northeast, go look at the Wild Seed Project nursery source list. Find out where your native plant sales are. There's a lot of, you know, lots of different nonprofits. Native Plant Trust, Grow Native in Massachusetts and Maine, we've got a bunch. Maine Audubon sells plants. There's lots of native plants being offered for sale in various ways. So this is the time of year to do your homework. And we have a lot of that information on our website under the nursery source listing.
That's awesome. There's so much to be said for the power of consumer power.
I just wanted to offer an example of something that's been working for us here in Wayland, Massachusetts. A few years ago, we established a design review committee, and this body provides services to people who are working on commercial properties, especially developers who come to town and want to put in a commercial property of some kind. What we found is that if you're going to get them to change their mind about how a building looks or landscaping looks, you need to get to them and have a conversation before they spend money on architectural designs and architectural landscape designs. Once they've spent a bunch of money and come before the town and they're trying to get permitting, they don't want to change a thing because they have spent tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on designs. What we did is this advisory committee works with the building department so that if a developer comes to town and wants to put in a new property or change a property, they are given a brochure and referred to this design advising group, who meets with them at no cost to them and talks about the town's priorities, that we want to see native plants in the landscaping. We want to see rain gardens in the ditches in the parking lots. We want, you know, various things about architecture. This is a very old-fashioned town. And we find if you get to them early like that, they appreciate the help, and sometimes they listen to you. So when they show up with a plan, it's full of native plants because somebody told them what to do to get acceptance from the community. And that's what they want. They want their permits. They want to build. It's working great.
That sounds amazing. Wow. All right. Well, folks, it's 1:05. I want to make sure everyone can get back to their day. I posted a link to the to a SurveyMonkey review of today's session. If you could all take the time to fill that out, that would be super helpful. So ELA can continue to bring you amazing educational events. Thank you so much, Heather, for your time today and sharing your expertise with all of us in the ELA community. It is deeply appreciated. Be sure to be on the lookout for some follow-up emails from myself or Peggy, and thank you all so much for attending today.